I used to work in the gas industry as a geologist from 2007 to 2009. I was on a contract with a Russian company called Northgas, back when industrial relations with the UK were still fairly cordial. There were lots of potential gas sites in the Siberian region far up north, and I used to go around potential sites with company borehole engineers, usually in groups of 2 to 3. Anyway, I was at one site in northern Siberia with a German engineer in late October of 2008. Took ages to get to and completely devoid of human habitation, but really beautiful taiga. Endless forests on the drive up there. Anyway, the site that we went to survey was fairly typical of what you expect in the industry at these sorts of locations. Thin topsoil giving way to permeable siltstone. Excellent locations for surveying. Now to the story. We came to a location where satellite imagery was suggesting that permafrost was retreating. It still snows and ices over, of course, but the key point is that it's not entirely frozen over. You can install stuff during the summer months, get gas production up. It was a pretty boring landscape though. Very thin topsoil, giving way rapidly to permeable siltstone. Lots of these natural holes all over the place too. Permafrost plugs that had melted and left 20 to 30 meter deep holes dotted all over the place. We decided to stay for a few weeks and do some test surveys. First week was completely fine, got some good locations, things progressing smoothly. By the end of that week though, things were getting a little weird. Every time I would go out with the spectrometer after that first week, I'd occasionally hear some noises from the holes. I was never near them, because while you get a whole lot of gas coming off these things, they are not terribly good for industrial drilling. It was faint, just on the border of hearing. I never knew how to describe these noises until a few years later, when someone took me out to a jazz bar and some guy was playing a violin-like instrument to make this drone noise. It's kind of hard to describe. Disconcerting, makes your hair stand up. My colleague would notice this too. Disconcerting, as in this job, you're not really working together, but apart. So 2 of us were hearing stuff out there. We were both rational people, at the time for me at least, so we put it down to cave noises. Laugh, forget all about it. About 10 days into the survey, it started happening at night. Again, faint, but really ominous. That drone noise. We used to sleep in the back of the van that we had brought, but even through those doors we heard it. Again, stop being stupid. It's just cave noises. Laugh, have a few beers, go to sleep. It got worse from there. The day after that, I found some slime stuff around one of the permafrost boreholes. Yeah, you get lichens and mosses around these things, not an issue. But this one was like petroleum jelly, that really viscous stuff. I touched it and immediately regretted it. It felt a lot like pork belly fat. It was warm too, which was really disturbing, considering it was -5 degrees Celsius during the day out there. Bring round the German engineer to take a look. He looks troubled. For the rest of the day, I was constantly on edge too. I kept looking back at the borehole too, just to check, I kept saying to myself. Things got worse at night. That drone noise got a lot worse, but it felt, and I know that's a crap way of putting it, like it wasn't from below, but above, on the surface. My German engineer tried to laugh it off, but I could tell he was seriously disturbed by it. Just that low sound. Eventually, we get to sleep. God knows how many hours later though. We wake up together, because there is definitely something attempting to open the door handle to the passenger seat of the van. Click, click, click. And now that drone is right outside, and it sounds a lot like gurgling. At this point, we both freak the hell out and scream like a pair of little girls. It stops. We do not sleep for the rest of the night, and it does not come back. Next day, as soon as we make it to 9 a.m., we cautiously open the doors. The entire back door is covered in this pork fat stuff. The place reeks of something rotten too. Passenger door just smeared in that stuff. But the thing that made us immediately go, screw it, we're leaving, was the passenger window, which was also smeared in the gunk. Had an outline on it, like something had pressed its skull into the fat stuff and left an outline. It was unmistakably some elongated human skull with no eye orbitals. Jelly stuff was all over the area around us too, and of course, led all the way to that borehole. We got out of there very fast after that, but as we were packing that drone, stuff started again from that hole, and it was loud. It was guttural by this point. Whatever the hell was making it was down there, and close too. German guy went pretty nuts after that. Just hopped in, immediately started going. Equipment that was still out for methane measurements just left. Did not stop driving for the next 14 hours. I pretty much ditched my job soon after. I had no desire to be left like that again, in the middle of places like that. German guy. Never heard from him, ever again. He never talked about it to me anyway. Thanks, I suppose. I guess distance from that event makes it sound pretty prosaic. Spooky noises, ooh, slime, ooh. During that night though, I was convinced that I was going to die. You know how you can just know when someone or something like an animal is nice, curious, or is just out to mess you up. I knew, instinctively, that whatever wanted in didn't want to crack open a beer and ask us about geology, if you get my drift. Anyway, I spent a long time after I had calmed down about it, which took a few months in fact, to think of a rational reason for this. Every time though, I kept butting up against the inexplainable. Sure, drone could be cave noises, but the warm slime stuff, the guttural noise. Around 2012, I got into reading about frozen mammoths and the worry about viruses from the taiga that they were expecting because of climate change, and at this point, I went full axe and said, screw it, it was a frozen monster. I had always thought that Japan would be the adventure of a lifetime. The allure of a new culture, different food, and an entirely different way of living was too much to resist. My job as an English teacher in a small town just outside Tokyo was perfect, giving me a chance to experience Japan in a way that most tourists never could. One of the first places I discovered was the little convenience store down the street from my apartment. It wasn't a flashy 7-Eleven or a Lawson's, but a small, family-run place that had a quaint charm about it. The sign above the door read, Kobayashi Mart, in fading red letters. Every morning, I'd stop by for a coffee and a rice ball before heading to work. The first few months were blissful. I quickly fell into a routine and started recognizing the employees at the mart. There was Yuki, the shy girl who always smiled and bowed deeply whenever I entered. Then there was Kenji, a friendly college student who enjoyed practicing his English with me. But then, something strange happened. Yuki disappeared. I asked Kenji about her, and he shrugged, saying she had probably gone back to her hometown. New faces replaced hers behind the counter, but they never lasted long. At first, I did not think too much of it. High turnover is normal in convenience stores, right? One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I went to the Kobayashi Mart for some comfort food. A young man I had never seen before was at the register. He looked terrified, glancing nervously at the trap door behind the counter that I had never noticed before now. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off as the jitters of a new job. I continued my nightly visits, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every few weeks, a new face appeared, looking more frightened than the last. I could not shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. One rainy night, curiosity got the better of me. The store was empty, save for the new girl at the register, who looked as though she might burst into tears at any moment. I pretended to browse the shelves, keeping an eye on her. After a few minutes, she opened the trap door and descended the stairs, leaving the store unattended. My heart was pounding. I crept behind the counter and peered down the dark stairway. A foul odor wafted up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I ignored every instinct in me telling me to turn back. I carefully made my way down the steps. My footsteps were muffled by the sound of the rain outside. The basement was dimly lit. I could hear the girl sobbing quietly. It took a while for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. When they did, I saw her standing before a massive iron door. Her back was to me. The door creaked open, revealing a massive, cavernous space beyond. She stepped inside, and I followed, staying as silent as possible. What I saw next will haunt me forever. In the center of the room was a grotesque creature. Its enormous, bloated body covered in glistening scales. Rows of sharp teeth lined its gaping maw, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence. The girl just stood there frozen. She was paralyzed with fear and could not move at all. Before I could react, the creature lunged forward, and the girl's scream was cut short. I stumbled backward. My breath kept coming in ragged gasps. I couldn't breathe properly. I turned and fled up the stairs. My mind was racing the whole time. I did not stop until I was safely back in my apartment, and then I locked the door behind me. My hands trembled. I could not process what I had just witnessed. Kobayashi Mart was a front, a facade. There was something monstrous beneath its surface. The next day I called in sick to work. I could not stop thinking about the previous night. I had to do something, but what? Who would believe me? The police? The locals? Everyone seemed oblivious to the fact that anything could be underneath their feet. Days turned into weeks, and I could not stop the nightmares that were plaguing my sleep. I avoided the mart, opting for a longer walk to the nearest 7-Eleven instead. But the guilt gnawed at me. I could not shake the feeling that I had to do something to stop this. Finally, I mustered the courage to return. The store looked the same as ever, but I knew better. Another new employee greeted me, her eyes wide with fear. I needed proof, something to show the authorities. As I browsed the shelves, I discreetly took out my phone and began recording. The trapdoor opened as usual, and she descended the stairs. I followed, keeping a safe distance. This time I was ready. I captured every single detail in that place. The iron door, the cavernous room, even the monstrous creature. I fled again, but this time I had evidence. I took it to the police. My heart was pounding the whole way there. They were skeptical at first, but the video spoke for itself. A raid was organized, and the mart was shut down. As far as I know, the creature was captured, and I guess hidden from the public to prevent mass hysteria. The town moved on. Nobody ever really got told about it. It was never in the news. No one ever reported on it. It was just shut down. I think they cited health reasons or something like that. As for me, I could not stay. The memories were too painful and the fear was too real for me. I returned to the US, but the horrors of that small Japanese town will stay with me forever. I still see their faces in my dreams, the terrified employees, the face of that creature. I just wonder what it was. Why were they going down there? Why was the monster killing them? Why were they letting it do that? All questions I guess I'll never have answers to. Alright, sure. First off, I gotta let you know, I don't expect you to believe me. Hell, I barely believe me, and part of me wants to dismiss it as being the result of all the drugs and alcohol I was into at the time. But given that it was specific to that location, and the fact that I have a scar to prove it, and frankly, how real it all felt, I don't really buy that. So I guess this is just really me getting it off my chest. Back in 2011, I was in the Fort Campbell Army Base Warrior Transition Unit after being medevaced from Afghanistan. For those that care to know, I got exploded and it fucked up my back, hip, and knees. Anyway, that barracks they stuck us in were God knows how old, but they'd been holding injured, crazy, dying, and soldiers who wanted to take their own life for a very long time. Stuff like that tends to collect bad junior, I've heard, and I've been to quite a few transient places, hospitals, homeless shelters, mental facilities, for depression, in case anyone's thinking I'm just schizophrenic, to know that vibe. This place, however, it felt angry seems too cheesy. It felt like something was about to happen, like the calm before the storm. That guttural feeling you get when you're a kid with a bad report card about to be opened. Anyway, one night, a couple of weeks in this place, I heard someone in the next room making banging noises and mooning gibberish at like 3 in the morning. This continued for the next 2 days. Sometimes I even thought they were scraping noises against my wall, until my squad leader asked me if I'd been sleeping alright, wondering if my pain meds were not working. I told him about the sounds next door, thinking this was someone really passionate about their masturbation and whatnot. He talks to me the next day, saying he'd looked into it, and there was no one living next door to me, surmising that it might have been echoing from upstairs. So I look into it. The floor above me was this guy named Bashing, real quiet type, into computers and trip-hop, slept all the time. I kinda doubted he was the source of the noise, but I asked anyway. He pointed out that as a matter of fact, he'd been up at 3 a.m., but was lying in bed, listening to his earphones. His roommate was still in the hospital too, so he got rolled out. I tried his neighbor as well, for safe measure, but he said he was knocked out and was in for stomach problems, so it was unlikely he was having PTSD-related night terrors, so I leave it be, and that night, I hear the noise again. This time, I get pissed, and even though I know the next room is empty, I knock hard against the wall. I was actually surprised when it stopped. For a moment, next there was no banging, no moans, only that scraping sound in intervals. I told myself it could be rats in the walls or some stuff like that, but that would not account for the banging and the moaning. I almost laughed. I was freaked out, yeah, but I thought spooky moaning sounds had to be the most cliché style of haunting there had to be. The next day, I had staff duty, which meant I was working the front desk all day, but also meant I had access to all of the room keys. So I waited for some dumbass to lock themselves out of the rooms, then taking advantage and sneaking a peek at the room next door. Only it turns out that it didn't lock at all. The inside of the room was clean, empty, no scratch marks on the wall, nothing suspicious at all except the feeling of being watched, which I figured was just related to last night's incident. So I went for a smoke to calm my nerves and asked what it meant that a door did not lock. The guy on staff duty told me that it was a room they used for people who wanted to take their own life. Well, crap, I thought. So this was fun. Of course, this was just the start. Later on that day, I rationalized it was probably someone who knew the room was open and was sneaking in to bang his girlfriend or some stuff. I considered checking it out next time the banging started, but frankly, both possible results of either finding some otherworldly stuff going down or watching some guy bump literal uglies with some stripper from Clarksville were equally unappealing. There was no need, however. There were no loud sounds coming from the other room for about a week. Then I spent all day drinking water for a urine test and spent the rest of my evening pissing clear liquid. I thought I was done, until I woke up at like 3 a.m., needing to piss real bad. That is when I heard it. The banging and the moans had stopped, but that scraping noise was sounding closer. And this could have been my imagination, but I could swear I could see fingers prodding out of my wall for an instant. I ended up saying screw that noise and sleeping in the bathtub that night. The next day, I went back into the room to change. Everything looked the same except dimmer somehow. I figured it was because I'd just woken up, but it stayed like this for the rest of the day. Needless to say, I was spending less and less time in my room. That weekend I got absolutely wasted and ended up passing out on my bed. I awoke the next morning with my cell phone in hand, a new text open with the words, "It's coming," typed in. I just had to burst into laughter at how corny it was. Part of me swore it was just drunk me screwing with hungover me, which is something I would do actually. The next day, I hooked up with this girl and we had sex, only to have her scream out, "I kid you not, it's coming." I was certain I had misheard, and she'd said "I'm," but I was bursting into laughter anyway, much to her confusion. I explained the situation after, and it turned out that she was big into the supernatural and psychic stuff. No surprise, I did meet her at a hookah bar. So, of course, she suggested a Ouija board, but I refused, saying that this stuff was already cliché enough as it is. She then suggested that I ask to switch rooms, which was reasonable, but I guess partially due to stubbornness and laziness, I kept putting it off. A couple of nights later, I woke up to what I could have sworn was a grab of my shoulder, stood up, and in the darkness, on the floor, I could see what looked like the outline of a million fat, giant black worms. Actually, shape-wise, I'd say they were more like leeches, writhing on the floor. It wasn't quite even a physical shape, more like I could see the shadows of their invisible bodies, at which point I went nope, and cocooned myself into a fetal position inside my blanket, certain that I was hallucinating, only to eventually pass out. The next morning I woke up to find a wormless floor and figured it was just a really vivid dream, only to find what looked like "It's here" scrawled into my little weatherproof notebook, as if I'd written it with my left hand. After downing a keg and suffering from a concussion, basically, it was almost eligible, which was a perfect opportunity for me to dismiss it as being able to be anything. So I go on later in the day to take a shower after PT. In the little bathroom right next to the kitchen and bedroom. These were really small barracks rooms, only to have my horrible rendition of the Red Hot Chili Peppers Under the Bridge interrupted by the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen area. I pause and yell out, "Who is there?" with no reply. I never hear a door open or close, which is odd, because if it had been staff, they sure weren't mindful about making all sorts of other noise. So there I am, naked, steam coming off me. I like my showers hot, carrying the towel holder pole as if it would do something, only to find the room empty. I relax, putting the pole down, only to feel like something was breathing behind me. I swear, I think I broke some sort of record for changing into clothes and bolting out of the room that day. So, I talked to my squad leader about switching rooms, claiming I still can't sleep due to the noise, and asked for an appointment with a social worker because of reasons. I decided to go to my room only to grab essentials and bolt, accidentally leaving stuff in my friend's room to avoid trips. Social work was no help. They suggested it might be brought on by insomnia, but that still did not explain a lot of the details, nor the fact that it was directly connected to that room. I went back into it, packing my stuff little by little for whenever there was a room available. But I'm guessing whatever was in there decided it was tired of subtleties. One day, as I was about to leave the room after packing, I felt a spout of vertigo, that quick feeling of the room spinning, only to find the stuff I packed strewn across the floor. This happened several times as I tried getting through the door, only to eventually give up and stay in, skipping dinner. The next morning, I ended up calling and coaxing my friend into meeting him in my room for breakfast. He called me to ask where I was after he'd knocked on my door several times and no one answered. I managed to get to the open door and meet him in the hallway at least, but spent most of that morning trying to coax him into coming over. Someone had to see what was going on. I could not do this alone, but I couldn't tell anyone either. My depression was getting to me as well. I had started cutting myself, nothing too deep. I guess just as a way of making sure I was awake. Luckily no one noticed, or rather unluckily, because at this point, I'd rather be institutionalized. Stuff was getting weirder. I leaned against the wall at one point, only to feel it wriggling underneath me. I'd talk to myself. Simple stuff like, did I leave this in my pocket? And I would hear a reply in my head that was not my own. Things would randomly be out of place. Thin yellow slime trails would appear to be sweating out of random spots on the wall. I'd occasionally feel random touches with nobody there. And, weirdest of all, I think, random little dried up frog corpses would appear seemingly out of nowhere. Finally, my squad leader came through, almost a month later, saying I had 2 days to move to the next room and clean this one up. So after leaving the place spotless and frog corpse free, it was my last nightingale in that room. Everything was packed and ready to go, and I was absolutely exhausted. I decided to lay down in full uniform because screw it, and dozed off. Without fail, 3 a.m., I had to take a piss. So I go to the bathroom, and as I'm about to walk back into the room, I see it. The thing had an adult-sized head, and a small, disproportionate torso. It had long, greasy, black hair, and its entire skin looked like that of a burn victim's. Its limbs looked boneless and coiled around like tentacles with fingers at the end. What passed through its head were just 3 large, gaping holes with what looked like giant black worms wriggling inside it. These holes gaped wider as it released an inhuman scream. Then I realized that part of that screaming was me, and I bolted out of the room. I stayed up for the rest of the night, smoking outside without talking. For some reason, the idea that this was a Hispanic woman came into my head, although that thing looked like it had never been human. The next day I moved to a separate room upstairs, which was stupid, given that I was in crutches. Man, Maybe I should have taken Chloe up on that Ouija board and feeling bad for it for some reason. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night, only to hear that sound again. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Luckily, however, 4 days later, we did a mass move to a newly finished barracks a few streets down, and those old ones became MP barracks. And hey, screw MPs. They could have that stuff. I did ask around, however, and people did claim to see weird stuff in those barracks every now and again, but at least my story there was done. Also, I sort of regret not taking pictures, but honestly, there was nothing to take pictures of other than tiny little frog carcasses, and that's just weird, yo. Also, when you are that terrified, surprisingly, your mind doesn't usually think, gee, this sure would make for a great Kodak moment. The guy who killed Hitler. Out for a night shift. Begins at 8 p.m. It's not night peace yet, about 8:15. Get sent out for disturbance of peace by sound which is odd, since it is not yet 10 p.m. Respond anyway. When me and my partner get there, the street is littered with broken plates. Every piece of plate that the guy had threw out the window. Loud music plays out of an open window on the first floor. Another plate falls out. We get into the house, the city cops are already on the scene. In my country, these guys just deal with wrong parking and stuff. One of them is holding a camera and pointing it at the door of the guy who threw the plates. It's not the night piece yet, I tell him, but he seems stressed by the situation, so I don't press it. He says nothing, still records. I shake my head to my partner and he laughs. I knock hard on the door, the kind of knock that anyone would open. Like 10 seconds later, the door opens. A guy stands there, smiling. He has a beard and is wearing just a shirt and slippers. His right hand is wounded and bleeding. I grip my gun, but I remain calm. Can we go inside? I ask politely. Of course, the guy says. Come in. Here, I just killed Hitler. Huh? The guy points on the ground. There is a pentagram painted with blood, which I guess came from the wound that he had. In the middle of the pentagram is a knife that is leaking blood. The guy has a gash about 2 centimeters on his right hand. He is smiling, optimistic-like. We both look at ourselves with my partner. Don't want to turn this into a bloodbath, so I talk him into letting us in, which he has. The music is still playing very loudly. The guy is pretty behaved actually, always smiling and such, but obviously, he's not right in the head. Turn down the music. You cause a ruckus around the neighbors. He goes to a PC and turns the music off. So, do you take any medication? My partner asks. Yeah, but I don't need them, obviously, he says. Yeah, obviously. We talk to him. He calms down. Guys, check this out. I'll show you my dad, he says. Sure, of course, no problem, I say, to keep him occupied. He gets to the computer, which was playing the music, and opens the file there. It's a picture of Barack Obama. That's my dad. The guy is white. Everyone is white in my country. Okay, sure, I say. We get the guy to come with us without using force, and he basically complies with everything that we say. We call an ambulance to get him to the psych ward. I sit with him just beside him. I don't even put cuffs on him. Watch out, it's a paranoid schizophrenic. He is dangerous, paramedic says. You don't say. Doctor checks him in the psych ward. You were here before. Are you taking your meds? The doc asks. Nope, I don't need them. Obviously. Then he just keeps turning to his left and whispering something. Who are you talking to? The doc says. My future girlfriend, he says. Doc looks at me and I shrug. They put him in there, and that's the last time I see him. Thank God. Be me, 2014. Cop in a small country. I'm like on a roll, have brains, be fit, and always optimistic. Life is good. Have GF for 6 years. Plan a future. Decide when to ask her to marry me. Things go well, and I manage to catch some criminals by myself. New star of department. 2015. We get called to a robber caught at mall. Just routine. This happens like 5 times a day. The guy speaks only when asked a question, like 2 times. Is tattooed from head to toe. Has some meth on him, etc. We get stuff done at the place and drive him to the station. I drive. He's cuffed in the back seat with my colleague beside him. He looks at me in the rearview mirror. This lasts for like minutes without him looking elsewhere. Notice he whispers something to himself. What is it? I ask. No response. I get angry and shout at him. I'm putting a voodoo curse on you. Huh, yeah, right. Shut up. Get shit done at the station and drive him to the prison. He is silent this time, but smiling. Forget about this, like the day after. For a week nothing happens. Then things start to get bad at the job. Lose some fights on the street. Citizens complain about me. Screw some things up real bad. Can't be up on the top all the time, I think. Have a dream. Sleep paralysis. First time ever, and I never had one after that. Can't move. A shadow looms over me, and then jumps into me. Wake up in a cold sweat. Next day, I drive alone from some stuff, use sirens, and drive real fast too. I screw up, and drive like 100 kilometers an hour into a busy intersection. Cars from the left ram into me. Airbag smashes into my left hand, with which I held the wheel. That alone saves me from breaking my spine, as I wasn't using a seatbelt. Don't lose consciousness, and I'm totally fine, no injury. Report it in the radio with shaky voice, smoke welling up inside the car. Crawl out from the totaled car. People are running around 2 other cars I smashed into. Everyone seems to be fine too, except for one kid, like 8 years old. He's bleeding from his mouth. Learn later, he bit off part of his tongue. Take him to the ambulance that just arrived on the scene. Parents shout at me and cry. Am later forced into a second ambulance by other patrol that arrived. Kid seems fine. I'm not put off duty for this. They investigate me with me working like always. Things at home get screwed up. GF breaks up with me. Mom gets put into a madhouse for schizophrenia. Dad cuts off almost all contact with me. Dog gets sick, almost dies, but pulls through somehow. I pull incredible amount of money into sick dog. That and a new flat I got with GF gets me into debt. Still investigated. Start to hate my job. Start to drink heavily. Drunk by dawn, dead by dusk. People talk behind my back. 2018 now. The investigation ends with me paying a fine. Things still going to shit. I am by any means one of the worst cops in the department. Still employed somehow. Remember the meth head today for some reason.